This is a clip from the Cannon podcast. To hear the full episode and get access to exclusive benefits, head over to patreon.com/thecannonpod and sign up for just £3 a month. So that's a good place to start with this idea of the lack of cohesion. It was a concern the other night, I'd say, in that game against the MLS All-Stars, the Manchester United All-Stars. It was a concern the other night against them, the lack of cohesion in the midfield. I suppose what I'm interested in is your take, and hopefully we can expand on that, on how we fix that. The issues that I saw as a sort of starting place to start you off, a lack of cohesion in terms of too much distance between the lines, in terms of there was far too much space between the defensive line or the back five and the front five, or however you want to view it, but there's the defensive distances and the attacking distances were far too big for me. I think we spoke about it on another podcast, but something along the lines of like one pass from Declan Rice to Martin Ødegaard or something along those lines. I don't know exactly what it was, but maybe it was two or something like that. Similarly, between Ødegaard and Havertz, it was like 2 or 3 passes. I don't know the exact numbers, but really, really low numbers. What do you see as the issue? Obvious things aside, we know that there is a kind of, that it was still in pre-season. It was their bedding in period. They're still learning the game, etc., etc. And how do you see us fixing that?
Yeah, so I think when you have a look at the game, it didn't look for great reading. It wasn't a characteristic Mikel Arteta structure. Like when you look at some of the passing networks, you saw this really weird U-shape network. Well, not weird, but something that, we've grown away from, but we return to. And it's just kind of, for me, an indication of the system not working. Those passing combinations that you were mentioning, I think what it was Kai Havertz to Martin Ødegaard and vice versa had one passing combination. I think between Declan Rice and Kai Havertz, which would make sense because when you talk about the midfield, I think there's 2 issues here, mate. Like there's one where we weren't effective in the final third, but even getting to the final third was something that I thought that we struggled with in the game. And that's not something that we've done with Mikel previously. And so I do think that there were some build-up issues that we do need to talk about. I'm a firm believer that what you see as your outcome often results from an issue stemming from the back. And we've got some, little questions that maybe talk about specific individuals in the back line that maybe we want to ask about. But for me, it started with, Gabriel, central center back, which was a very peculiar role for me. I appreciate that we're experimenting. But the one critique I would have there is I don't believe that Gabriel is somebody that could be our quote-unquote libero. And what that just means in a technical term is somebody that's going to be starting the build-up and receiving off both sides. I don't think that Gabriel is at his strongest there for all his improvements on the ball that we've seen, both in terms of his receiving, his gate receiving, but also playing passes. He's improved, but I don't think that's a particular strength. And so I would look towards Ben White as the next up after Saliba. I would look to Tomiyasu as the next up after those two. I would even look to Jakub Kiwior. Though inexperienced, has a much better reception, both sides. And so I could understand that. So that was the first issue that I think caused some different dynamics in how we built. And then you look at Tomiyasu, who I actually thought individually had a very good game, but when you look at it, was very wide in build-up. And you look at Declan Rice, the man of the hour, and you look at how much of on an island he was throughout the entirety of that game. And it wasn't just having our fullback invert to be near him. There weren't many players that were operating in spaces that were compact. And that was the fundamental issue. And so when you have a breakdown in the build-up, kind of how we talked about with Gabriel not offering himself to the left, and of course Tomiyasu being wide, it forces him to particular angles. We talk about his ambidexterity, but I don't think that he plays ambidextrous. He can receive ambidextrous, but he can't chip a ball with his left foot over the top of the opposing right back. He can't, slip in balls in a sense of a Zinchenko through between the lines with cute passing and tight angles. He can receive. He can do a very serviceable job, but he naturally opens to the right, and it almost condenses our build-up because Gabriel himself, he loves to open left. Tommy likes to open right. And so you get this natural U-shaped backwards dynamic when the two play. And it is made worse when he's in the central center back role. Yeah. Kind of to end, and I'll just throw it back to you just to talk about those passing combinations. Typically, you would look at Declan Rice to Kai Havertz because that's the same side, right? Like you want to see how that builds up. And there was only 4 passing combinations between those two. Between Martin Ødegaard and Jurrien Timber, there was only 2. and then there was only one passing combination between Kai Havertz and Martin Odegaard. Doesn't take a genius to realize that between our midfield, we did, what was that, if my math's correct, 4, 2, and 1, 7 passing combinations. That's not great. And I don't think that's...
not.
Yeah, no, and I don't think that's individual based, is I think what I'm trying to get at here. I think there was a breakdown in structure, so when we talk about this and fixing our midfield, it's not a personnel plug and play of a personnel issue. I do think that we just had to tweak some structure issues that people weren't getting, and not just one.
Yeah, before we move on to specific solutions, I do want to pose 2 more problems, and I think one of them was I felt that Timber and Rice were getting far too square. If you watch at the best points of last season, in my opinion, in terms of our build-up, Xhaka and Partey found themselves on the slant. They found themselves with one would be slightly ahead of the ball, one would be slightly behind the ball, offering themselves an option, be between the lines. It was very rare that you catch them literally standing in a straight line. And I saw there far too much of that with Timber and Rice. And again, that happens at times. But I think what you do is you then limit your angles, you pull people onto you. You don't also then drag the opposition players around, because if you've got someone standing, in a 2, one standing slightly ahead and one standing slightly in front, you can move the players around. There's a bit of a sort of a question about where they need to stand as well. And the second thing as well is on Rice, which is possibly part of the solution. I felt, and I don't know if you saw the clip that I posted, but I felt that there was a Rice is still slightly playing hero ball, and when I say still, it's his first start for Arsenal. So let's really pump the brakes on that, but also similarly accept that we have 3 games until we're back in the Premier League. So there is a sense of urgency about this. I felt he was dropping far too deep a lot of the game, being sucked in towards his centre backs. I think he's projecting the idea of the West Ham centre backs onto Gabriel and Saliba. Frankly, I think he's still thinking he's playing with Agard and Dawson, and he needs to accept, I think, that these guys are build-up and progression monsters. These are guys who can really do it, and there are times, of course, that he needs to drop in and offer himself as an option, and there are times he needs to stay as an option between the lines. There's times he needs to pin and create space for someone else. It's not to say he always needs to stay between the lines, but I think part of the thing is developing that game intelligence out of the kind of West Ham hero ball thing of, let's say, a Rodri. Because I think Rodri's biggest skill, and again, this is something as we move forward to the solutions, Rodri's biggest skill for me is understanding the temperature and the texture of the game. What do I need to do right now? Do I need to recycle? Do I need to progress? Do I need to play a switch ball out to the right-hand side? Where's the space? Where are my teammates? And Rodri actually, he's so good in all phases of the game that he can adapt and change and be like, actually, I'm going to sit in for a little bit. Actually, my centre-backs do need some help, so I'm going to drop in. But I just felt the Rice's desire at the moment is to be available, be available. And actually, sometimes you do need to go and stand in a different place and allow others to do what they need to do, because it's going to help us. So that's what I see as one solution. I'd like your opinion on that. And secondly, I think Timber, for me, I also think the distances just need to close. There was partly that, and that might also have been because of United's desire to go long, and actually they did go long quite a lot, and that might have contributed to that. There's certain other things, we didn't have. This is the first time they played together. There's just going to be some teething issues, but I also felt that Timber personally was a little bit, overzealous. I think he was a little bit overzealous in his actions and found himself sometimes stranded and not always available as an option. And look, Timber is comfortable in so many zones and so many positions, which is great, and I love that. But sometimes you do just need to accept, again, almost similarly to Rice, I actually just need to stand here for a second, chill out a little bit, allow the ball to recycle, allow us to reset. And I felt he was, I don't want to say the phrase running around, because that's not fair, but I think he was slightly overzealous in his actions. But yeah, thoughts on those two and your possible solutions?
I mean, I think that the one thing that I felt was that there was far too many, not just Urian Timber and Declan Rice, but I even think Kai Havertz, Martin Odegaard to a certain extent, that were not letting the game come to them. And there was issues that they were seeing in the back.
It was like 5 protagonists, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
All trying to win the game. And it's like, whoa, guys.
Yeah, and there needs to be a calm head. And, I think the funny part is, ironically, a lot of people would be like, well, what's the difference between Declan and Thomas Partey? And I don't know if he would help in that scenario. Yeah. Somebody that's a little bit more vertical, he's obviously a world-class player, and it's not the case that, his quality doesn't help. It's just more his nature, right? I fundamentally think that the distances were an issue. I've kind of talked about it before, and I just think that it really stems down to that you know, it's less about, you know, curbing the hero ball for me, but simply make sure that you stick your position, let the game come to you, and make sure that we open up a little bit better. And I think you have to talk about Aaron Ramsdale, Gabriel, and Tomiyasu, who for me was the difficult portion of that. You know, I actually felt that, you know, the right-hand side built up a little bit better than the left-hand side. And I do think that it stemmed from this dynamic of Tomiyasu really only being able to cut in onto his right. And then, you know, alternatively, Gabriel preferring to open left. Yep. Like, Gabriel himself is really one-footed, and that dynamic is an issue. And so if you actually look, Declan Rice cheated left, and a lot of people just assume he has a left-hand bias. No, I think he recognized the issue in that channel, and so he cheated to that side. What Yuri and Timber should have done, instead of holding his position, was cheat central. He didn't do that far enough for me. And I think that he stayed wide a little bit too much, because I think he still didn't quite understand the system. But when Declan moves that way, you need to fill in. So for me, there was just not that natural, I got you, in terms of the positional rotation kind of thing. People were doing things to solve issues and not filling into the right spots. Just led to a breakdown, and I'm not worried. I think that, you know, we just need to be a little bit more tight in our mechanisms there. And of course, when you looked at the second half, I love the pod of Trossard, Emile Smith-Rowe, and Kieran Tierney, who I think naturally, the only reason I bring that up, have a much more natural opening to that. And I look at Kieran Tierney as similarly struggling sometimes to build up in the back. But why did Trossard work as opposed to Tomiyasu, who filled into those spots sometimes? Even Emile Smith-Rowe, who shined in his 19-minute cameo. I think that pod offered a little bit more insight, and ironically, is a team that, you know, look, although misfits in a sense, they also have been with the team longer. The pod that we're worried about is the pod that haven't played together. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think the kind of U-shaped thing you described with Gabriel and Tomiyasu is a big thing. Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. To get full episodes and access to exclusive benefits, head over to patreon.com/thecannonpod and sign up for just £3 a month.